This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
Wow, welcome to Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. And by the way, Gary, thank you. I've got a setup here. We listened to all those who were giving us grief about the sound, and tell me if the sound isn't better. So I'll look in the comments, okay?
Don't look in the comments. It's better. I did the setup. It's good. You've got the professional everything. We're good to go. Everyone who wants to comment. Mark, you ignore them. Listen, my friend, I remarked to you yesterday in our text thread that we have so many stories that we need to be on today and maybe 2 or 3 full shows this week, which I don't think we're going to get. So we got to cover a lot of ground here. I was looking back through our...
And by the way, thank the Lord, our fearless leader, Adam, who was up at the Trans Am, ended up crashing, but he's okay.
Yeah, thankfully he had a rough one. It looks like the car took most of the damage. It was a rainy day, and they called the practice short. My understanding is, but then the next day they went out and there was some puddles that people weren't quite aware of, and he fell victim to one of those. And luckily, he's fine, and it sounds like the car is okay as well. So I hope his weekend wasn't totally ruined, but. In the meantime, you and I have a lot to cover, and I was looking back through through our text thread, and I came up with at least 5 or 6 stories that we haven't covered. And I'm going to start with one that we actually haven't discussed. I wanted to get your take on the LAPD arresting ASAP Rocky at a private terminal at LAX when he returned from a vacation with his girlfriend and pregnant girlfriend, Rihanna.
Yeah. Now, this I don't understand because I was inundated with text messages because some media outlet quoted me as representing him. Did you see this, Gary?
No, I didn't see that, actually. I just wanted your take as a defense attorney who's dealt with high-profile clients. I didn't know that you were mixed up in this.
Yeah, well, I'm not, and which is why I was surprised when not only was I mentioned as his lawyer, but they were actually quoting me, which I thought was kind of I chuckled, but, you get extra. This is one of the things when people talk about so-called celebrity justice and always say, that the celebrities get the benefit of the doubt. It's actually quite the opposite in my experience. They get a scrutiny and a attention that others normally would not get. And this appears to have all the earmarks of that.
So the only thing that I could, as a layperson from the outside reading these stories, the only thing that I could quite figure was that they wanted to surprise him so that they can execute a search warrant and try to find a piece of evidence that they feared he may try to destroy or dispose of. And that led me to believe that maybe their entire case hinges on finding said piece of evidence. I don't know if they did. They reportedly executed a search warrant on his home with a battering ram and left with a few boxes worth of stuff. But what was your take on the surprise nature of it?
Look, it's fascinating to me that's how they did it. I would imagine that the affidavit, when you get a search warrant, generally what happens is the investigating officer, in this case it would be LAPD, files a declaration under penalty of perjury to lay out in the affidavit the probable cause for getting a magistrate, fancy word for a judge, to sign off on issuing both a search warrant or an arrest warrant sometimes. And here, my guess is that it's still under seal. I would love to see what was said in the affidavit, because the idea of doing this at the private lounge makes no sense to me. Why would somebody take a valuable piece of evidence as they're leaving? If they're going to dispose of it, they would have disposed of it before they go. If they're retrieving it, why would he be taking it to the airport with him? It just doesn't make sense. So it'll be interesting to see affidavit where we get it. Right now there's more questions than there are answers.
Absolutely, and we'll keep an eye out for those affidavits when they do become public. You want to switch to the other celebrity story that we have? I actually have a couple of pieces of video here.
Oh yes. And, can only be Depp versus Heard, right?
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. Let's start with the video that you sent me, which made me chuckle.
Now you're a lot bigger than Amber, correct? Physically?
I wouldn't say that.
Okay. Would you agree with me?
Just classic internet, meme stuff. The adding the Larry David, Curb Your
You have to
Enthusiasm
admit
music.
it was pretty good. I mean,
It's fantastic.
Yeah, and by the way, that you may get a smile from jurors. I wish you can't film the jurors' reactions in any court that I'm aware of, but the idea that that's the road you're going to go down is, I think, somewhat. If you could take that back, you would take it back as a lawyer. Let's just leave it at that. Let's roll the tape for the next one.
So the next one doesn't have any audio, so I'm just going to kind of play it here. Whoa. Sorry, technical difficulty there. So this other one was something that I saw. And there's no audio here, but it's a video of Amber Heard talking to her lawyers, and you see here she kind of smiles and then remembers that she's supposed to be sad. And I just thought that was a tough look for all those viewing on the internet, because that has been going pretty viral.
I'll say it now. I've said it everywhere, including on our podcast. You have to remember, Johnny Depp brought this case. He's the plaintiff.
Yep.
I do not understand. I mean, I understand lawyers wanting to get paid, right?
Sure.
But the idea that you bring this case, I don't think they're working on a contingency. I can't imagine that they are. And if they're working on an hourly, you've got a duty to tell Johnny, look, nobody remembers the 2018 op-ed written by Amber. Least of all, I doubt that your kids do, even though that's the supposed pretext for why you did this. You already went through this once in 2020 with over in the UK, I believe, with very little to show for it. And all that did was create an imprint or a footprint on the internet to make sure if your kids didn't see it before, that now they get all of the lurid details. And now this one has become kind of the intellectual cotton candy for the US and the global media right now, as a kind of a tonic or antidote to the Ukraine coverage. And all this is doing is, I think it's mutually assured destruction. I've said it before, and it certainly strikes me that the end game here is there used to be people who would talk about the Streisand effect. I've never I've never embraced that, but this certainly amplifies any issue that he would have had. Remember, he was not mentioned by name. She characterized herself as a domestic violence survivor. Now, I've made this argument, and people have kind of pushed back and said, well, he hasn't worked since then. The scuttlebutt in Hollywood is that it had nothing to do with the op-ed in the Washington Post that didn't name him from 2018. It had much more to do with difficulty on set, insurability, and things of that nature. Having been through that with numerous artists, I can tell you that op-eds are not what concerns them. Insurability is what concerns them. And if somebody has got a bank, so to speak, meaning that you put them in a film and they're going to deliver, they can overlook a lot of transgressions. And this is just, I think, a fool's errand in terms of his image. So for those who are surrounding him, I know it's nice to be employed, but remember also the previous people who surrounded him were accused by him of stealing upwards of $650 million.
That's exactly right. And for those who are interested in what Mark just alluded to in terms of the Hollywood scuttlebutt, Johnny Depp attempted to star in a film that was about the behind the scenes of the LAPD's investigation into Christopher Wallace, also known as Notorious B.I.G. And I believe that was in the time after the 2018 accusations. And you can go read about that. That movie, you probably have never heard of it because it was not well received, and he was apparently a bit difficult on the set, to put it mildly.
Right. So you can't, it's a lot more nuanced than I think people understand. I've heard people make the comments, that he's being prosecuted. I mean, that's actually, and I understand that because that's actually what it seems like. It's like, who would put themselves through this voluntarily? And you can say whatever you want about Amber Heard. I've heard all kinds of awful things about her as well, but that does not mean that this has any salutary effect. And by the way, what is the point at the end of the day of this? What's the end game? It's certainly not money.
Exactly. As we've alluded to, she doesn't have 50 million, and if he's had 650 stolen from him, he doesn't have the 100 that she's countersuing him for, likely. So it's just it boggles the mind why one would voluntarily spend their own money to go through this.
What it looks like? It reminds, by the way, this case is exactly why I shy away and have always shied away from family law or divorce matters. It just, the rationality kind of leaves the building when you're talking about these things. You get into it, and everybody, you understand it, but everybody loses perspective on it. And it's an awful, awful situation. And by the way, this train wreck, one of the reasons people are so fascinated by it is you can't turn away.
Yeah, it's really miraculous that I'm even married, because my wife was a family law paralegal for the decade preceding my meeting her. And I'll tell you, you find someone who works in that field at a wedding or at a cocktail party, just start asking them questions, and you will absolutely never want to get married. I mean, the stories they will tell you, it's just absolutely insane. So I don't blame you for shying away from family law.
It's next up.
Look, I'm looking at 4 stories here at least, maybe 5. Where do you want to go, Mark? I'll follow your lead. I
don't care. You pick them. It's you did me, by the way. We're doing this on Sunday. This is the commemoration of the 107th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, where the Ottoman Turks rounded up the intelligentsia and killed them on April 24th, 1915. Down the road, there's thousands gathering at Times Square. The White House just did a statement this morning commemorating it. There are those who are pushing back in the Armenian community that it's great that we're finally getting the president to acknowledge the genocide. Now, why are we supplying money to Azerbaijan, who 2 years ago invaded Artsakh and slaughtered 5,000 Armenians who had been living there for decades, and Armenia has been there for thousands of years. I have tweeted today that my disgust with the LA Times. They, by the way, they have done absolutely zero coverage. Los Angeles is the largest community in the diaspora. All they do is recycle conspiracy theories while ignoring the genocide. Covering today, it was on the front pages, Gary, of the LA Times. The Gilroy Garlic Festival and the truck convoy. That's what they considered to be the editorial priorities of Los Angeles. Shame on them. Shame on, by the way, there's Armenians over there. Shame on you for not shaking things up over there. Yeah, you need to be held accountable, and the community will at a certain point. So anyway, thought I'd get in.
No, absolutely.
As somebody who all 4 of the grandparents fled at least on my mom's side, the pogroms, and on my father's side, the genocide. It's a very solemn day to commemorate.
Well, Mark, I'm going to follow your lead from couple things you just said there. First, the LA Times. This is a story that you and I found over the weekend, and all it shows here in this shot that I'm showing you is the headline and the first line of the article, which I'll read. "I'm so sick of Rick Caruso." That's the opening line in Nicholas Goldberg's article here that is headlined, "If Rick Caruso wants to buy LA's mayoral election, that's okay with the Supreme Court." What the hell with our paper of record?
This is exactly my complaint. The LA Times, what they do, that's a completely ginned up story. The Supreme Court is a reference to Citizens United. Got it. Rick Caruso is spending his own money. By the way, there is an argument to be made that is actually something that's good for the populace. Why? Because if he's spending his own money, that means he's not beholden to special interests. Would you rather he was out there holding out his hand to the teachers union or to the correctional officers union or some other union? Or would you rather he was getting dark money from the Koch brothers? Or would you rather that he was getting it from Soros? Depending, it doesn't matter where your ideological bent is. Why is that a bad thing that he's running for office? Because he's a successful businessman who believes, like I do, by the way, that you can't do business in the city of LA under the current administration. And by the way, I'm old enough to remember Dick Reardon, who was also wealthy, not as wealthy as Caruso, but he did take Los Angeles and a downtown LA, where he, by the way, had a restaurant. His was the Pantry right down the street from Engine Company. And he saw what was going on in downtown LA, came in, and he did a fine job compared to what we had under the last administration of turning it around. And I don't understand that hit piece. And by the way, Gary knows because I text it to him every day. It's like a constant drumbeat of hit pieces on Caruso because, and by the way, you don't see scrutiny of Karen Bass. You don't see scrutiny of Mike Fuhr to the level that they have leveled at Caruso. And they do the same thing with the sheriff. The sheriff is a daily hit piece. That's all they know over there. They've got one reporter or two reporters assigned to the Villanueva hit piece beat, and they've got they publish opinion pieces on Caruso that are scandalous, in my opinion.
Worth pointing out, Sheriff Villanueva has been a lifelong Democrat, and at least as of filing, Rick Caruso is as well. So we're living in this world where it's like you're not blue enough, so we're just going to destroy you. It's absolute. Well,
and by the way, it's like they don't even read their own newspaper. They've got retrograde amnesia. They excoriated a week ago. I sent you one of these articles, Gary. They excoriated in an opinion piece, I believe by the editorial board, this idea of the pushback on Gavin Newsom's homeless initiative because he had all of a sudden, after many years and billions of dollars, has realized now that it may not be a housing issue foremost primarily, that it may be a mental health issue. And boy, that contradicted everything. Then what did you see just within like days of that?
Here, I'll show it to you now. I was just pulling it up while you were speaking. Let's see here. It says LA homeless death surged 56% in pandemic's first year. Overdoses are largely to blame.
And if you read down, you'll see, guess what? That the priority that the new Court Cares Act that's being proposed going through the legislature, those brave souls, which prioritizes mental illness. Now it turns out that the people who were dying on the streets were not dying from COVID, which was what the first kind of explanation was, but they were dying from overdoses and addiction related, which, by the way, I wonder who that is reminiscent of and who echoes that, or whose analysis that echoes.
Yeah, I believe
Dr. Drew.
I've heard a friend of mine.
This is the 1 year anniversary of their hit job because Drew called out exactly that.
And offered, let's not forget, offered to volunteer his time and knowledge for free.
Right. And by the way, as the Times fled downtown LA to go to El Segundo, I mean, the hypocrisy, the institutional hypocrisy is not just on a macro scale, it's on a micro scale. And it really is, it's disgusting. I mean, they are just as, I think, in my opinion, they are just as responsible for the decay of Los Angeles as anybody.
Well, it is sad, not all of our listeners will get to see, but the number of times that in an email or a text chain between you and me and some of the other people who kind of help us contribute to this show, where we'll just send 2 links to 2 LA Times stories that are days apart, and then we all laugh about, like, well, how are these people working at the same paper? Like, let's get them all on a Zoom and have them explain themselves, because you can't.
They can't. I mean, I'd invite one of the editors from the LA Times. Show yourself. Come out. Why don't you defend yourself? Because basically you're chicken shit.
Come on this podcast. We won't even subject you to Adam. Come on this. Right. Come on Beyond. I will be tempered. I'm not going to yell at you the way Adam is. Mark might, but
or one of these feckless reporters, but they won't do it. No. They don't have the guts.
All right, last one. Just because it's been tragic how many things we've had and we haven't been able to cover it all. We got to talk Elon Musk.
I know who it is. Yeah. The amazing Kreskin. Elon Musk, your hero.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Twitter buyout, which is a fascinating story, legal story, I think.
I agree. I mean, look, we've got Elon making this bid to acquire Twitter. Elon's in a little bit of hot water because he acquired 9% and reportedly he did not, make the appropriate filing after he got to 5%, which is a federal rule that if you own 5% of a company, you have to let the SEC know. So he's in some hot water because people are alleging that by not reporting that, he kept the price low so he could acquire another 4.1% at a price he desired. So he's dealing with the SEC on that. He then tendered this offer to Twitter's board, $46 billion. He's secured $25 million of it in loans from, I believe it was
$25 billion.
Huh?
$25 billion.
Sorry, excuse me. $25 billion in loans from one of the big investment banks, and then he's going to put up 21.5 himself.
All secured by his Tesla stock. So he's putting his money where his mouth is, because that's, if you believe what we read, that's the kind of the gravamen of his net worth. He's also criticized the directors for not having any skin in the game, the directors at Twitter. That, I think he's not on very firm ground, because there are some arguments to be made that creates a conflict for the directors. But at the same time, the idea, and it looks like, you tell me, you're in the weeds on this, Gary, it looks like Dorsey, who's no longer there, is signaling either silent approval or acquiescence. What's your read on that?
Yeah, it seems like he is trying to stay out of it as much as he can so that he doesn't necessarily get caught with whatever the blowback is going to be. I think he is still a board member. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but he's in the mix to a certain extent. He's just no longer in charge. But I think he's kind of trying to stand out of the way, and I don't blame him, because when it comes to, billionaires who are willing to put their money where their mouth is and do reckless things, Elon's unpredictable, and he always has been, and that's sort of part of his brilliance. But, what I'm sort of interested in as a Twitter fan and as a Twitter user is some of his proposals just really sound reasonable. His idea that, what we're going to do is we're going to verify everyone. No more of this blue check mark only for the celebrities that Twitter decides. If you're a human being and you're on Twitter, we're going to verify you. We're going to figure out how to do that. And then anyone who doesn't have a blue check mark, you can just assume is a bot or a Russian troll farm or a, whatever. And I think that's interesting. I think he's, his cornerstone principle is that Twitter has become the de facto town square, and free speech is essential in his mind. He has called himself a free speech absolutionist. And what he's saying is, now this is the town square. I have the money to do this. I think free speech is essential for a global discourse, and I want to make that, something that's preserved. And I think that's noble. Now, I don't understand how he makes money at it. It seems like this is just a losing battle, and he's trying for nobility. But if that is the case, I kind of agree with it.
It's going to pan out to be a very, very interesting legal fight, because you can already see the Twitter board has adopted what's commonly called a poison pill,
right,
which basically makes it harder. And this was something that was developed, out of the kind of M&A wars in the 80s and the 90s, where companies would adopt kinds of regulations and barriers to entry that would make it tougher. At the end of the day, I think you're going to find some very interesting legal maneuvering. He's already brought on board a couple of firms to advise him. Twitter has also brought on board a couple of large firms to advise them. This is going to be kind of a legal war of the worlds.
Yes, it is. I won't go into the details, but I played golf with somebody recently who worked in mergers and acquisitions during the late 80s and early 90s, and I asked for their take on it, and I was very surprised by the answer. It's, in my mind, it's the board has a fiduciary duty to their stockholders to do what's right to make them money. And he had some very interesting takes that maybe we'll get into in a later show.
Well, one of the things that I want to talk about in the later show, I found today that there's a segueing into the tease for the big show, or at least the next big beyond. Is it an 11th Circuit opinion? Where I sent it to you today, Gary, along with something that suspiciously sounded like a chapter in one of Adam's books or a movie.
Are you talking about the case out of?
It was a free speech case.
Oh yes, the
university campus. What's the name of the case?
Let's see here. It is in the 11th Circuit, and it is Speech First Incorporated versus Alexander Cartwright, and as the president of the University of Central Florida. Right.
It's
an interesting case.
Yeah, read the quote that I think I sent you. And mind you, this is a judge who I believe is a Clinton appointee, and is no kind of born-again conservative. He, like me, is befuddled and betwixt and between as to what's going on. I've always cast it in terms of the law school issues, where there's no longer the right to hear opposing viewpoints, which I think the law schools are even more supposed to be laboratories for reconciling different viewpoints. But this is in the case of an undergrad. Do you have that quote from him?
A university that has placed its highest premium on the protection of feelings or safe intellectual space has abandoned its core mission. The protection of feelings or the creation of safe space rightly might be the foremost goal in some settings, like at a family dinner, but it is not right for a university. Its unambiguous mission must remain the pursuit of truth. A university that turns itself into an asylum from controversy has ceased to be a university. It has just become an asylum. Judge Marcus, a Clinton appointee to the 11th Circuit, is no conservative.
Yeah. I bet you Adam's got a lot more to say about that on Tuesday. So
I guarantee you're right. There. Absolutely correct, Mark. Thank you so much for taking the time on a Sunday. And to those of you who were expecting this on Saturday, per my tweet, apologies. We had some scheduling issues, but here we are. And thank you guys so much for listening. Mark, appreciate your time.
See you, Gary. Good to see you as always.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. Stay tuned for more bonus episodes coming soon.